Good afternoon. We're here at Bonner First Baptist Church, and you might see that the background is a little different. We're getting ready for Vacation Bible School. It begins next Sunday afternoon. Ladies, before you go, what's the times on Vacation Bible School? 5:30 to 8:30. That's Monday night through Friday night. And we want to invite you, if you have kids that are in the neighborhood, or if you can bring them to Bonner First Baptist Church, we'd love to have them for Vacation Bible School. And that is not this week, but next week. And they're already getting ready with the decorations and everything, and the kids will have a great time. So, Patrick, you've been out. You haven't been away, but you haven't been on the panel for a while. It's good to have you back on the panel. I think this is your first panel in the Family Life Center.
Yes.
But anyway, it's good to see you back. And the subject is Psalms. And you've loaned me a book, and I'm going to be looking at it, and I know I got to get it back to you by next Sunday. But anyway, Psalms is just it's much beloved, but a lot of people don't know a lot about the Psalms. I mean, I think for most people, they think that the Psalms is just kind of like a collection, like an anthology of poetry and that kind of thing, when in reality, the Psalms are put together by editors. It has the flow of a book, and it has the message of a book. And many people, commentators, and I found this true as I'll be preaching through some of the themes of it, it's like the Old Testament in summary. Mm-hmm. And as you trace the 5 books of the Psalms, you do see that. From the earliest history of Israel until, because Moses is, a couple of Psalms, is it 1 or 2, is attributed to Moses. And then, of course, David, about almost half of the book, and the rest among the various composers, but many of them composed during and after the exile. Mm-hmm. So it spans 1,000 years as far as the composers go. And the editing probably took place early in the post-exilic time. I think, too, and this is one of the things, and I'll get your comment on this, one of the interesting things about the Psalms is these composers, in the crunch of life, or in the glory of life, they write these songs, they write these poems, and later on these poems they're preserved. One of the ways that it amazes me about God's preservation of His Word is how it was preserved, how the canon comes about through that. So, to collect material that's over a period of 1,000 years, pretty amazing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and to have them collected and grouped in those certain ways, right? So according to theme, according to sometimes authorship, you see these patterns and stuff like that. You see interesting interplays, because I think you mentioned last week how we tend to. I think you mentioned it last week, where we tend to take each psalm sort of like on its own,
right?
And if we're missing that, I think your analogy was like taking a little bite out of a dinner, instead of like letting the courses and the side dishes and stuff play off of each other, and realize that it's meant to be consumed as a whole, right? So where this one, where Psalm 46, 47, and 48 form a triad, right? But it's also significant how it's placed after 45.
Right.
Like there's a flow to that that's lost.
45 is the king's marriage, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So like depending on one's eschatology, for example, you've got a dispensationalist would probably place this, or a premillennialist would place these 3 psalms as millennium, because it's talking about the kingdom and what kind of king Christ is. Right. That's getting away from your question.
No, but that's a good thought. I mean, because one of the things about the Psalms is we read them today, and we realize that they are kind of a summary of the Old Testament. Also, they're for the people of God in all ages. Mm-hmm. And as they point to Christ, they point to His first coming, they point to His second coming, they point to, in His first coming, His righteousness, His sufferings, His triumph in the second coming, all of these things when you see the Hallelujah Psalm. So, yeah, I think that's a great point, that that these psalms are arranged for our edification. And so while you can read a psalm, a particular psalm, and be encouraged, for example, how many funerals, do you go to and you hear the 23rd Psalm, either as just something that's read or as the text for the sermon? I know I've used it several times but I always mention when I give the 23rd Psalm, I say, this is a valley psalm, because 22 is that psalm that talks about the sufferings that that are even quoted in the Gospels about Christ's sufferings, but it's about the King, and then Psalm 24 is this triumphant psalm. So they are arranged in groups, and it's good to read them. I think beyond just for individual encouragement, it's good to read them as you would read the Word of God, for not just a boost or not just encouragement, but to be edified in worshiping God. So with that, and what I was getting at this morning, when you read any psalm and when you read the book as a collection, especially the second point, the first thing is you realize that the psalms are written as poetry. And Hebrew poetry is not like English poetry.
No.
Not at all. Now, I know that you've come at this some from kind of a spiritual aspect and a covenantal aspect. So is there anything you might say or add to what I said this morning about the particular style of poetry and how we should read the poetry of the Psalms?
I don't think so. There's different ways in which different style. I mean, even for somebody who speaks and only knows English, there's still different types of poetry,
right? And
different styles and techniques that poets use, and it can be, especially if you're a kid and it's like, well, that poem doesn't rhyme. That's not really a poem, because that's kind of the first sort of poems that you learn. It's like nursery rhymes and that sort of thing, and then it's like, especially now, I feel like that the definition has broadened. But it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, it's a poem, it's a poem when you're reading it, or when you're hearing it. And you might not even be able to put your finger on exactly what makes it a poem versus a conversation or just like something that's just prose. But like very common techniques in Hebrew poetry, right, if they want to emphasize a point, I think you brought this out, was repetition, a refrain, but also like they'll state something in one line, and in the very next line they'll just rephrase it, but the two things mean exactly the same thing.
Right, parallelism.
There's a parallelism, or there's another way of heightening it, right? So I'm thinking it's in Proverbs, right? There's six things the Lord hates.
Yes.
7 are an abomination.
Yes.
Like, it's like, what? Well, is it 6 or is it 7? Right? And it's like that's not the point. The point is like he's driving home. Like there's a set amount, right? And there's these things specifically is what is an abomination to the Lord. But we're just not used to hearing those kinds of phrases. But when you think about it, when you start thinking about different idioms and things that we use, we say stuff all the time that's not a literal, like it has a meaning beyond the literal meaning. It's just it's an idiom that we say.
Yeah. There was at the end of Proverbs, here's going back to what you say, and this is positive. This is not what the Lord hates, but he says, there are 3 things which are too wonderful for me, for which I do not understand.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the way Hebrew poetry works.
It's like you thought of an extra one.
Yeah.
Well, I've already written that down 3, but I'm going to correct myself.
Yeah. So when he says that, it just emphasizes, and maybe it makes the 4th one the main point. So here is an example in Psalm of parallelism. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Okay, so all right, we get it. The Lord is your salvation, so you don't fear. Kind of like 46 starts out, and Luther turned it into the great song, "A Mighty Fortress of Our God." And then the next line in this same verse goes, "The Lord is the defense of my life. Whom shall I dread?" So he's saying the same thing. There's the same sentiment said in 2 different ways. And what I find in that is that it's more descriptive. It's more evocative. It brings forth all these images to your mind, and it helps you to see. Now, I know in our world with telephones and computer screens and television, there's a lot of back and forth about how much screen time is good, and some is good, some's even good for children. Too much is not good. The wrong kind is not good, but there are good kinds and all of that. So, I'm not going to go off on that. But at the same time, when you read something, the images form in your mind, and it enhances your imaginative powers and prowess, you might say, so that I just think it's more meaningful and more internalized when you read this imagery and you see it in your own mind's eye, what's happening. I think it gives you a greater appreciation for what the author is saying about God, about trouble, about Thanksgiving, all of these things. I think the imagery is very helpful. I truly do.
Yeah, and it's diverse imagery too.
It is diverse imagery.
Right, and I think because the authorship is diverse. Of course, it's all God-breathed, right? It's all inspired, divinely inspired, but the writers of the Psalms were different people. The writers of the Gospels were different people.
That's
and you see personality, you see technique, and those things come out. So you have a diverse authorship, and you also have a diverse audience. The Bible is speaking to people, not just different individuals, but different cultures, different time periods, different countries and nations and ethnicities and backgrounds and everything. And it's kind of wild when you think about it. Like we focus a lot on the disunity within the church, all various denominations, things like that. But the fact that the church has continued to be spoken to and guided by the scriptures for so long, out of all these different cultures and stuff like that, is just, I think, it was just a further witness and testament to the divine origin of it.
Absolutely, to the fact that God wrote this book, and part of that is how this poetry, how this Hebrew poetry from a language that is not used, can transcend time and culture, for sure. And it would make you think that it was either genius or divine providence. And I think it was a lot of both.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, so the next thing that I talked about in the sermon this morning are the superscriptions. So back to the same psalm that I was just reading from, Psalm 27. At the top it says, a psalm of fearless trust in God, a psalm of David. So we've been talking about how these psalms are edited into a collection, into various collections that form these 5 books. And that's part of the process, part of the divine process of canonization of the Psalms. Now, the composers did not write the superscriptions.
Right.
The editors did. So the question is then, okay, how helpful are the superscriptions? Now, the superscriptions, I would not say that they are canonical, but I would say they are reliable traditions, and therefore, I think they can be helpful. I certainly think I don't think they should be shunned. I think they should be appreciated for what they are, for helping us to set the context of particular psalms. I mean, for a person who's looking for an emergency text as they go through the Bible, superscriptions might be a good thing.
Right, yeah.
I need a psalm, so here's a protestation of integrity and prayer for protection. Well, do I need that?
Right.
So I think the superscriptions are helpful, maybe not so much in the emergency as they are in just studying the Psalms as a collection, see what holds them together, and see what, you see the transitions and the segues. So what have you thought much about superscriptions? Bo asked me the question last week, what I thought about the superscriptions, and I said, well, I'm going to talk about superscriptions next week. So what is your experience with superscriptions?
I only within the context of just thinking about the topic of the transmission and preservation of Scripture.
Yeah.
So it's not, the Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they have it easy because they've got these plates that were just delivered, right? And it's just like, boom, there it is. But that's not how the Bible came to be. No. That's not how it was written. There was editing. There was scribes that copied and stuff like that.
Let me give you an example of that while we're talking here. So at the end of Psalm 72, verse 20, that's the end of that section. The prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are ended. Mm-hmm. Obviously, an editor's note. So
right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and you have the books of Moses that are attributed to Moses as the author, but that include his death.
Yeah.
And burial.
Right.
Like, did he, and then theologians and scholars, did he write this ahead of time? And then, you know what I mean? Or did Joshua slap this on the end? Like, does it matter?
Right.
And what does that do? How does that inform our doctrine of preservation of Scripture? And like, so how does it help us answer questions like whether or not the superscriptions or the titles and chapter divisions, or not chapter divisions, but the titles basically, and right. the divisions between the books of within the Psalms, for example, like are these rise to the level of inspiration? Is it just tradition? Is it divinely guided tradition? You know what I mean? And those are all really interesting and fascinating questions. I don't think it's questions that anyone needs to spend too much time getting bogged down to, unless you're like, you're an academic that's going to make your academic career is right. publishing something on that.
Yeah. And there has been such done for sure.
Yeah. I mean, but it's really interesting, the speculation. So looking at Psalm 46, which was the focus of your sermon today.
Yes.
You've got my translation here says, for the choir director, a song of the sons of Korah, according to Alamoth.
Right.
Right. And Alamoth, they pretty much think, from what I was able to determine, it means something along the lines of like according to or for the maidens. Mm-hmm.
The virgins.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it was like, and so they're trying to like figure out what they can do, what they can deduce about this psalm and what they can assume and everything. And somebody was saying, because it mentions the river that's secure, that feeds the city of God, that potentially that this was commissioned by King Hezekiah, who was like fortifying the waterways, and that it was maybe not written by the sons of Korah, but it was given to the sons of Korah for them to perform or arrange and to worship. Be sung by a chorus of right. female voices. Like, we don't know for certain, but it's really interesting.
And I think that's probably as good as it gets, as far as I think this is a word of instruction. Mm-hmm. And I brought that out in the sermon, that some of these superscriptions have to do with instructions for the choir leader. And the choir leader wasn't what we have now. This is temple worship, and it's different. And I'm pretty sure that later on, again, you think about post-exilic psalms, these psalms would have been sung or chanted in synagogues all over the Middle Eastern world. So I think the superscriptions are many times instructional. So when you and I look at that, this is what I glean from that. And I love what you just said about divinely inspired tradition. I like that. I think that's about what it is. I think, well, here is a psalm that was intended for God's people to hear, because not everybody had a songbook. Mm-hmm. It was intended for them to hear, and in time they would memorize it, the Hallel, they would memorize it, because they would hear it from Sabbath to Sabbath, and hopefully internalize it. The Lord is my strength. And, I can't help but think of Luther's song every time I start with "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." But I think that superscription helps me to understand this was for the worship of God's people.
Mm-hmm.
So here I am as a Christian. This is a psalm to me that leads me in a heart and attitude of worship. I mean, it's not about worship wars, should we just sing psalms or anything like that, but it is that in singing the psalms and in reciting the psalms, there is great instruction and satisfaction in worship.
Mm-hmm.
That's
mm-hmm.
what I think. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about like Psalm 46 in particular? Anything that stood out to you? I know you're kind of using these as sort of like exemplars of whatever particular type of psalm you're talking about. It was,
but I did study the psalm pretty extensively, and it just again stood out to me as the chorus and the second two stanzas. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our stronghold. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our stronghold. It really is about the power and the immutability of God, and that He is not some tribal God, that He is not some small God. This is big G God, who is in control of everything, and because He is, then I have security.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I got out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I got two things that stuck out to me as I was going through this, and I'm kind of thinking ahead to when I'm going to share on July 6th about the imprecatory psalms. A couple things. One, first of all, in this, like, just take the first verse. Actually, you can get both of my points out of just the first verse. God is our refuge and strength, a helper who is always found in times of trouble.
Right.
So one is this psalm is written in a plural.
Yes,
God is our refuge,
Yep.
but not all psalms are.
Right.
Some psalms are written in first person singular. I this, I that. A lot of the psalms of David are written that way.
Yep.
And one thing that I'm going to talk about a little bit in a few weeks is about the corporate nature of Israel and sort of how we tend to see things differently in our current culture and time. They were much more, I don't want to, collectivist is not the right word, but they saw themselves as individuals, but also as part of the one God's people. So a lot of the language that is singular is heard and interpreted and sung and stuff by them as if it's from the perspective of the nation. Yeah. As if the whole nation is one individual.
Right.
And you see that in various books of the Bible where we're used to saying Israel, and when we hear Israel, we think of the nation of Israel.
Right.
But originally Israel was one guy. It was Jacob.
Right.
And it's the nation is named after him. So really it's just using his name to stand for this whole group of people. That's why they're sometimes called the children of Israel. It's not children of the nation. No, they're the descendants of Jacob. Right. Like that's what's being said. Sometimes they're called the children of Abraham, right? So there's that. I just think that's interesting, and that's going to come out too. So even if you're reading a psalm, that says God is our refuge and strength, it's okay to read that in private devotion and understand that it's my refuge and strength. Absolutely. And vice versa. It's perfectly fine in corporate worship to use this psalm of David that says, I am crying out to the Lord, and realize that we can also extend that to mean I, the church, is considered as a whole.
Right.
So that was one. Also, specifically with this one, God is our refuge and strength, a helper who is always found in times of trouble. And I think a lot of Christians think that when they come to faith and they join a church, they become believers and they start following that is going to take away all their problems. And just the implication here is, right, we're still going to have trouble.
Yeah, he's a helper in times of trouble.
We're still going to need refuge.
Yeah.
So just because we enter a time of trouble or tragedy, it doesn't mean God has left us. Because if we never had that, then he wouldn't be a refuge.
Right.
Like then you know what I mean. Like that's we're still going to need refuge. We're still going to need to rely on His strength. We're still going to need Him to be our helper. We're still going to need Him in times of trouble. Therefore, we will not be afraid, though the earth trembles, etc. If the earth started trembling and the mountains started falling into the sea and the water roared and foams and the mountains quaked with turmoil, I would be afraid on one level, but on another level, I would not be afraid because I would understand that, like, hey, this is a time of trouble, but God is my refuge and strength.
Yeah, and in life, going back to Luther, the mountains quaking and the sea and all this imagery is literal imagery, but it stands for spiritual and emotional and personal trauma. So Luther is on his way to the Diet of Worms to be put on trial for heresy. He's been told that they're not going to kill him, but he doesn't really trust them, and in fact he will be kidnapped to keep him from being killed by the Catholic Church. But he writes a song from this psalm, a song from this song on his way, because he says, you know, my world is a turning upside down. My world is in tumult. And when this happens, his very words were, you know, I'm going to sing the psalm and let them, that is the church, do their worst. So that's the way it is in our lives. We sing the Psalms and let the world do its worst, and that's the way it is. All right. Thank you, Patrick, for helping us tonight to explain this a little better, and we look forward next week to seeing you again as we continue through the Psalms. Thank you.